Hello, students. Welcome to Mr. Sandwich Reads. Today is the thrilling conclusion of Donna Napoli's The King of Mulberry Street. So if you've been following along, today is the day we're going to finish. So please tune in. All right. And we're back. I am, of course, Mr. Sandwich. Today, I, as promised, am finishing The King of Mulberry Street by Donna Napoli. At this point, I'm assuming you're with us. You know, spoiler alert. So if you haven't read the novel, go back and read the novel or listen along. Pietro did not make it. Pietro being Tin Pan Alley. Well, Dom decides, I'm going to go out. I'm going to find him or find where his Padrone is, and I'm going to rescue him. Well, it's too late. Dom finds out by another young boy there being held captive by the Padrone that Pietro was killed. Well, Dom tries to save Pietro's shoes, but as he's kind of throwing them ahead of himself. He's bloodied and in rough shape and just trying to make it out alive. So we'll see if I don't know if it tells us at the end of that chapter or not. If he makes it out with the shoes, I'll just reread the last paragraph, something I like to do. That's when I heard them, Dom. They were yelling, Dom, where are you? And then, look, that's him. And the sound of running, shoes running. That symbol of shoes we should talk about. Shoes are repeated in here. 2 sets. I want to see them, both of them. I wanted to tell them to save Pietro's shoes, but I blacked out. All right, so we're going to jump in here to chapter 22, Eldridge Street. Before we do, we're on the final chapter. One big question I continue to ask, do you think Dom is going to end up going back to Italy, back to Napoli to see Mama? Is going to maybe make it to America? What are your predictions here? I will have you pause and maybe turn to somebody or jot down a quick idea. How do you think the story will end? So take a moment to do that. Predictions? All right, hopefully you had a chance there to make a prediction of how things will conclude here in chapter 22, Eldridge Street. And if you're following along, this is on page 230. Gaetano once said that a few days alone was enough to make a kid grow up. I didn't know if that was true, but that night in the Padrone's room, I grew up for sure. Grandinetti reported the Padrone to the police, but no one expected anything to come of it. Boys disappeared all the time. There were way too many cases for the police to follow up on. All right, hopefully you had a chance there to make a prediction of how things will conclude here in chapter 22, Eldridge Street. And if you're following along, this is on page 230. Gaetano once said that a few days alone was enough to make a kid grow up. I didn't know if that was true, but that night in the Padrone's room, I grew up for sure. Grandinetti reported the Padrone to the police, but no one expected anything to come of it. Boys disappeared all the time. There were way too many cases for the police to follow up on. Boys were dispensable. The worst thing was, it was my fault Pietro died. I was the one who came up with the idea of his escape. Gaetano helped against his better judgment. Grandinetti and Signor Esposito were pulled in out of decency, but I started it. Gaetano never reproached me. Grandinetti and Signor Esposito never reproached me. And Pietro, I couldn't imagine Pietro ever reproaching me for anything. Friends forgave. How terrible it was to need such forgiveness. I stayed at home for days while Gaetano and Grandinetti ran the business. They took Pietro's death as hard as I did, but I was the one with the ripped-up back. Signor Esposito bought ice to glide over my back and neck. All I could do was lie there and think. I hadn't saved Pietro's shoes. If I could have done it all over again, I'd have grabbed them. I'd have found the energy somehow. But now there was nothing I could do for him. I couldn't even write to his aunt to tell her he had died. I knew the street, Vico Sedil Capuano. Again, sorry for my butchered Italian. But I had never found out Pietro's last name, and maybe the aunt had a different last name anyway. There was nothing I could do for his spirit. As soon as I could put a shirt on without gasping in pain, I went out to Baxter Street, to Witold, the Polish butcher. He greeted me with a big smile. "Welcome back, my friend," he said in halting English. "You went missing." Guilt stabbed me. I hadn't asked Gaetano anything about the business since the night the padrone had whipped me. "No one came to buy beef from you." "Oh, yes, yes, my friend. Another boy comes every day." I let out my breath in relief. Good old Gaetano. I could imagine his hating every moment of it, but he did it for the business. So Gaetano, in Dom's absence, continues to provide the kosher option for sandwiches. In fact, he has already come today. I am sorry you wasted your time coming here. I came for a different reason. I wanted to go to synagogue with you. Synagogue being the Jewish place of worship. Witold laced his fingers together on his belly. "You understand Hebrew?" "I remember some." He looked at me for a full minute. I was sure. Then he nodded gravely. "You are just what America needs, just what has been lacking, an Italian Jew." I blinked. He laughed. "Come back at 6. You can eat with my family beforehand." Oh, it was Friday. I hadn't even realized. I'd come in time for the Sabbath. As I walked out, I reached up and touched the mezuzah. I was tall enough now to do it without a boost. That evening, Witold's family ate sour cabbage. I had to fight to keep my nose from wrinkling. They spoke fast, with so many harsh sounds in a row. "Polish must be a hard language," I said. They laughed. "That wasn't Polish," said Witold. "That was Yiddish, what Eastern European Jews speak. Some just call it Jewish." And by the way, the Sabbath, too, is a Jewish holy day every Friday as the sun goes down. Is usually like a power down for practicing Jews, where they're not supposed to do any manual labor or really anything. In fact, in Jerusalem, they have elevators that will stop at every floor because Jews that are practicing Sabbath aren't even really supposed to like push the buttons on the elevator. You're not supposed to do anything. It's kind of a way to just take it easy. So that's what Sabbath is. They're having a Sabbath. Usually, have a nice dinner on those Fridays. I felt stupid. Italian Jews didn't speak Yiddish. I couldn't begin to mimic them. What was I doing there? But then Witold's wife draped an old sweater over my shoulders and told me I could keep it. And Witold put a yarmulke on my head, and everything was right again. I felt small, like before Mama put me on the cargo ship safe. Witold wrapped himself in his prayer shawl, and the family walked east on Canal Street to the synagogue on Eldridge Street. With every step, I could feel the new scabs on my back cracked open, setting me on fire all over again. But I kept my eyes on the white tassels of that prayer shawl and tried to listen as Witold told me about the history of the synagogue. It was new, built only in 1887. Anyone was welcome, but really, it was an Eastern European synagogue. The rabbi spoke Yiddish, after all. The service was long, and my back hurt so much I could barely listen to the Hebrew. I hardly knew Hebrew anyway. But I was there, in the most powerful one's house. I was begging his forgiveness, his mercy on my wretchedness. I cried the way I'd cried when I'd found Pietro's shoe on the padrones silently. Over the next week, day by day, my strength came back. I kept that yarmulke in my pocket, and the following Friday afternoon, I went back to Witold with a bottle of Falagina, wine from Napoli. Again, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. Witold put the bottle on one end. Witold put the bottle on one end of his butcher counter. I tilted my head in question. "I did not drink," he said, "but it makes good decoration. An Italian gift from my Italian friend." I set the yarmulke on my head and ate stinky food with his chattering family and went off to synagogue with Poles and Russians. I didn't understand much of anything. Beniamo, Dom, it didn't matter what I was called. I was Neapolitano, and I didn't belong at an Eastern European service. I could have just worn, excuse me, Beniamo, Dom. It didn't matter what I was called. I was Neapolitano, and I didn't belong in an Eastern European service. I couldn't just worm my way into Whittled's world and the comfort of his community. I couldn't pretend that all this was mine. It wasn't a synagogue that made a Jew anyway. It wasn't a yarmulke or a mezuzah. I was Jewish inside, in my head. I had to use that head, like Mama said, to find my way, to be loyal to everything that mattered to me. That was the only way to survive, and survive was her first rule. When I explained to Whittled, he put his hands on my shoulders and said, "Shalom, my friend." Shalom. I'm mispronouncing that. Shalom, my friend. Shalom, peace. I hadn't thought of myself as being in a battle, but Whittled was right. War raged inside me. I wanted to scream half the time. I wanted to scream because the idea of going back to Napoli had died. I no longer yearned for it, though I still spent the last hour before falling asleep trying to smell the scents of every corner of our home in Napoli, trying to feel every swatch of material, to taste every sauce in every pot. This was my private treasure. But maybe the lion statues at the Piazza dei Martiri weren't as large as I remembered. Maybe Palazzo Sessa, the synagogue, wasn't that high. Maybe Mama wasn't sitting in a window crying for me. It didn't matter anyway, because I wasn't going back. In December, I turned 10. I'd have a little celebration with Gaetano and Grandinetti and Signor Esposito, and maybe even some of the boys who worked for us at the cart. They'd say, "Cente anni," wishing me 100 years of healthy life. 100 years away from Napoli. 100 years without Mama. That made me want to scream, because so long as I planned to return to Napoli, I had something to work for. I didn't belong in Napoli anymore. Mama didn't want me there. It hurt so bad to know that, but I couldn't stop the knowing anymore. Gaetano had helped me to know, my friend Gaetano. My friend Pietro, he had helped me too. He had said something that last time we were together. He'd said he could have found out the price of a passage, but he didn't want to. He was more afraid of being alone than of his padrone. He was a liar, like me. I remembered Mama's words to Franco. I had lied to myself about that. I remembered them exactly, because I'd stood there that morning and wanted to ask her why she kept talking about my going, why she hadn't talked about our going. Mama put me on that ship alone on purpose. My mama did that terrible thing to me. I couldn't pretend I didn't know anymore. And now I belonged here. I remembered Uncle Aurelio saying a true Neapolitano couldn't stay away forever. That was why when the Jews were sent out of Napoli, they kept sneaking back. But I could. I could stay in 5 Points forever. I had a life here, in a family of sorts. It wasn't the family I was born into, but I loved them. No one in this new family had betrayed me. I belonged with them. I belonged with them. That was what going to Whittled's synagogue had taught me. My family was that comfort I needed. Pietro was wrong. I wasn't any braver than he was. I couldn't face what Mama had done on my own. It took my new family to help me. In the business, too, that kept me working and feeling useful. By now, the brothers who had worked for our cart all summer had left us to go to school. Their family didn't send them to parochial school. Parochial. I should know that. Parochial. Their family didn't send them to parochial school, even though they were Catholic, because the Irish ran those schools and no Italians wanted their children acting like the Irish. So they went to Public School 23 over on City Hall Place. I'd see them walking there in the morning. It wasn't far. I knew because I followed them once. It was just between Duane and Pearl Streets. So we had been hiring other boys, older ones, who had already dropped out of school. Some were new immigrants who had tried school, but because they couldn't speak English, they were put in the primary grades. They hated being with babies and being forced to speak English badly in front of their classmates. Plenty of them weren't fresh off the boat, though. They had to come to America really young and stayed in school through the 2nd grade, at least. But even as little guys, they couldn't take being made fun of for their English. So they quit. Older boys cost us more than the brothers had. Some of them didn't like taking orders from Gaetano, and they hated taking orders from me. They pocketed money and stole food. One day, when Grandinetti was listening to me and Gaetano complain about the thefts, he said, "What do you love about working?" "What?" said Gaetano. "No one loves working." "You do. You love the business, both of you." "Well, the business," said Gaetano. "Sure, I'm happy with the business." "Tell me why." Gaetano held out his hands. "It's simple. We make money." "You could make money in a factory job," said Grandinetti. "Not as much," said Gaetano. "Besides, I'd hate it." "Me too," I said. "Someone else would tell us what to do all the time." "Appunto. Exactly," Grandinetti pointed at me. "Okay, so maybe you've got to give these boys more responsibility, more authority." "Never," said Gaetano. "We decide what happens with our cart." But I saw what Grandinetti meant. We could buy a second cart. "What are you talking about?" said Gaetano. "That's got nothing to do with anything." "I'd stay with one cart and you'd stay with the other." "What? Compete with each other? Are you nuts?" "I'd set up on a different corner a few blocks away." "But who would speak to the customers at my cart?" "Come on, Gaetano, you know you can speak English." His temples pulsed. "You're such a hardhead." I threw up my hands. "You know you can do it, and you can do the numbers too. You're fast at adding now." "How would it solve anything? We'd both need helpers then. We'd double our problems." "We'd take partners, maybe Umberto and Emilio. They're smart, and they'd watch out that their friends didn't steal. People aren't going to steal from a friend anyway." "I can't believe you'd say that," said Gaetano. "You'll die a mook, you know that?" "I'll die the king of Mulberry Street." Grandinetti laughed. "I believe you will, Dom." "Because look, we'd pool the money from both carts," I said without slowing down, "and earn more." "Double," said Gaetano. "We'll earn double." So they're kind of talking about like franchising, like a big business, fast food business, you can imagine, has different franchises, right? They have different restaurants spread out, and that's more money that they're ultimately making as a business. "Well, see, that's the point of having partners. The carts would pull in double, but we'd each make the same, because our new partners would share 25% for each of us, because we'd all be equal." "Whoa, we don't need more partners." "Sure we do. We'll have double the number of sandwiches to buy and cut up and rewrap, double the work. They'd have to be partners too." "I don't know, Dom. We'd have to get along with them, pay attention to what they think. It could ruin us." We paid attention to what Pietro thought, and we did good. We did better because of him. My whole body went hot. Pietro was proud to be a partner. I said softly, "Let's give Umberto and Emilio a chance." "Wait a minute," said Gaetano. "Wait just 1 minute." He looked away. He walked around Grandinetti's store. He rubbed above his mouth at the thin mustache that anyone could see now. "No. But, no. You and I get 30% each. They get 20 each. Until we see how it works out," he grinned. "And I get Emilio on my cart." By December, both carts were doing all right, and nobody stole from us. It was almost Christmas. On the weekends, I took walks and eavesdropped on passing conversations. No one could stop talking about their mother, it seemed, but what she always cooked for the holidays, about her every ache and pain, about how she should have been named Maria if she wasn't after the Virgin Mary. There's a Neapolitano proverb that goes, "Mama è gueva sei prazano, quando non sei teneno, ciao, chai." Your mother and your youth you appreciate only when they're gone. But it's not true. Italians love their mother every day of their lives, and especially at Christmas time. This wasn't my holiday. Hanukkah happened around now. I didn't know exactly when, but my birthday was coming, so I thought I'd buy myself a present. Vendors had set up tables all along Mulberry Street with nativity scenes, just like the ones down Via dei Tribunali in Napoli. I walked up and down, looking over the tiny wire baskets filled with clay eggs and the minuscule paper bags overflowing with ceramic apples, all just like in Napoli. And I smiled to realize that it was a true memory. I'd forgotten about these scenes, but I remembered now. Then Senora Esposito got a letter from her daughter, who lived way across the country in San Francisco, California. She couldn't read it, so I read it to her, and she praised me to the skies. She brought her friends to me so I could read the letters they got from relatives during the holidays. I was just like Uncle Vittorio, reading letters to the women, and that was a true memory too. I used to want to get a letter from someone who loved me, and to remember a letter to someone I and to write a letter to someone I loved. I remembered that. And now I couldn't stop the memories. The way a woman held her baby reminded me of Aunt Sarah and baby Daniela. The way another woman lugged two large bottles of wine, one in each hand, reminded me of Aunt Rebecca. And yes, the way a woman stopped and squatted in front of her son and smoothed his shirt reminded me of Mama. I couldn't keep myself from remembering Mama. A woman tucking a towel over a basket of produce was Mama tucking the sheet over me to keep out mosquitoes. A woman tapping a winter melon to see if it was ripe was Mama tapping me on the head for coming home late. That woman running her hands through her hair as she stood wistfully in front of a flower store was Mama. And that one swinging a package in one hand and holding tight to a child's hand in the other was Mama. And that one throwing her shawl proudly over her shoulders was Mama. Mama everywhere, in everyone. Even Senor Esposito frying meatballs became Mama. Christmas Eve was a Saturday. I walked through the last-minute shoppers, my feet pinched in those well-worn shoes, people's breath puffed out in front of them. I couldn't remember seeing breath like that before. Napoli got cold, but not this cold. It was as though our souls danced in front of our lips. I buttoned my jacket and headed for Mott Street, for the shoe store where I'd bought Pietro's and Gaetano's shoes. It was already early evening, so the Sabbath was over. I bought a pair of shoes with plenty of room, and I put my old ones in the box, and I went outside and lost myself in the crowd again. I walked and walked. The shoes Mama gave me had saved me so many times. Without them, I might have been thrown in an orphanage after I was fished out of the water that first day in America. Without them, the translators at Ellis Island would have let that uncle, quote unquote, the padrone, claim me for the padrone he worked for. Excuse me, yeah, the uncle was serving the padrone. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to borrow 25 cents from Gran and Eddie to buy that first sandwich to cut up and sell. Mama did a smart thing in buying those shoes for me. It was probably the smartest thing she could have done. And I knew she'd sacrifice to do it. Maybe in ways that were awful. She tried to protect me, even though she was crazy to put me on the boat. She tried. Those shoes were the proof. I'd been walking for half an hour up and down the streets. I'd been ready to be disappointed with my new shoes. Instead, with each step, they felt better. They felt wonderful. In an instant, I knew Pietro's spirit lived in these shoes, just like my grandfather's spirit lived in the credenza in our home in Napoli. I stopped and looked down and made a promise to Pietro's spirit about what I'd do in these shoes. I'd find a way to fight the Padroni, to fight the whole Padrone system. I had no idea how, but I'd do it. I'd find a way to fight the Padroni, to fight the whole Padrone system. I had no idea how, but I'd do it. I'd walked on with determination. Somehow, I found myself on Eldridge Street, passing by Whittled Synagogue. But I didn't stop. I walked north block after block, enjoying my new shoes. The street was empty here, except for a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, who stood on the sidewalk, his feet ghostly on the freezing pavement, and peeked through a lit window. I stopped beside him and looked in. The room was full of people standing in groups, drinking and eating and laughing. "What's going on?" I asked the boy in Neapolitano. He looked at me briefly, then his eyes went back to the party scene inside. "What is this?" I asked, this time in English. He shook his head and said something in a language with a lot of rough sounds. I walked over to the door. The sign on it read, "Neighborhood Guild." I'd heard about this place. It was one of the new settlement houses that gave English lessons. Those people inside were probably all immigrants, celebrating the holiday with their classmates. I went back to the boy and looked through the window with him. Maybe that overweight man was his father, or maybe the balding man, or maybe the one missing a front tooth, or maybe none of them. I handed the boy my shoebox. Happy Hanukkah, I said. I smiled. Merry Christmas. The boy blinked at me. He said something in his strange language, turned tail, and ran. A block away, he stopped to open the box. He looked back at me and waved. I grinned and waved hard. Who could tell what that boy might do in those shoes? I thought of my promise to Pietro to fight the Padroni. To do that, I'd have to go to school and get the education Mama wanted for me. I could start with night classes at the settlement house. My cheeks were wet. White stuck to my eyelashes. White bits sparkled in the air. Snow, my first snowfall, dusting the world. I walked home to Signor Esposito's, leaving sharp footprints behind me in that perfect white. When I went into the kitchen, she was humming and grinding nuts to layer on fettuccine with cinnamon and powdered sugar, a sweet dish, my favorite. She was making all the best dishes for my birthday dinner. I kissed her on the cheek. She smiled softly and kept on humming. And there you go. That is the conclusion. As we see here, Dom does not make it back to Napoli and does not reconnect with Mama or the family. He preserves those memories of his family and that love, and even Pietro, he preserves the memory and becomes determined. So I'll probably follow up with a posting to kind of just go over symbols and themes in the book. There's plenty to absorb here, and I'll kind of just let you be with the end of the book here. You could think about what might happen is Dominant. It sounds like he wants to take these English classes so that he can get an education. Do you think he'll just focus on the business? What do you think Dom's future is going to look like? It's kind of fun to imagine. So, all right, I will check back in with The King of Mulberry Street by Donna Jo Napoli. This was the last chapter. Hopefully you followed all the way through. I do hope you enjoyed this great young adult. It's fiction, historical fiction. I'll say it's historical fiction. But I will at one point too read the postscript so we see sort of what it's based on. It's very much rooted in reality. But again, I hope you enjoyed The King of Mulberry Street as much as I did. Love it. That's it for today. We're done. We finished The King of Mulberry Street. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't already, please do. Give me a like. Send me an email. Send me a Twitter. Send me a Twitter. Tweet me at. Twitter me at. Netflix me. Let me know what you think. All right. Hope you enjoy.